Good morning, welcome back to Aliyah Yomi. Today we're going to be learning Metzora Shishi, the sixth Aliyah in Parshas Metzora. Our Aliyah is about bodily excretions, and it is 13 psukim long, running from Perek Tezvav, Pasuk Tezayin to Chof Ches. Let's take a basic overview of Aliyah. It's divided into three basic sections. The first is what's called the section of Shichvas Zera. This is the spilling of seed. This is referring to a seminal emission in a man. In such a situation, a man would be impure until evening and needs to go to the mikveh. And then it describes the things that a person can be metame in such an instance, and the various interactions that a person can have with others, which would make them impure as well. The next thing we hear is what we will technically call today nida, which is a state of menstruation, where dam yeh zava b'vsara, a woman bleeds the monthly cycle time of menstruation, and we are here that the Torah tells us shivas yamim tiyeh b'nidasa. For 7 days she'll be in a state of impurity, and then describes all the impurity that can be connected to, whether it be touch or the various different things she sits on or is close to. And then we hear about the process of purity at the end, which is going to the mikveh and washing clothes as well. Then we hear at the last section of the Aliyah, what we know today is what's called as zava. This is the parallel to the zav, which we learned about in the last Aliyah. Zav is we'll call it a spiritual defect in a man, where they have an unusual excretion when it comes to a man, and now here we're about an unusual excretion for a woman. In this case, it's more severe than the regular case of nida, where instead of it just being 7 days, it is 7 clean days are needed in order to exit a state of zava. So 3 different topics which are in our aliyah, all about bodily excretions, 2 of them normal. So shechvas zera, the seminal emissions, is a normal state of affairs. Nida is a normal state of affairs. Zava is a not normal state of affairs with a more severe level of tuma and tara. Now, let's just a few basics. What is the halacha of shechvas zera, of seminal emission? So the Torah actually says that a person who has a seminal emission is tamei until evening and needs mikveh. A person is impure until evening. Ezra Sofer actually added an extra addition to this, and he said that a person who is in such a state cannot learn Torah, and later on it was also added that a person cannot daven, which is a very significant gezerah. That gezerah ultimately was rescinded because something which people were not able to live by, this extra added gezerah of Ezra about davening and learning. It is worthwhile noting that this notion of a Baal Keri, is a person who is in the state, who has seen a seminal emission, is talked about numerous times in the Mishnah around Shas. As an example, the Gemara in Brachos Daf Chaf Beis talks about a person who is a Baal Keri, who has had a seminal emission, and he can say he can think about the Kriya Shema, but he cannot do the Birkas Kriya Shema. Why is the difference between the two of them? Rav Soloveitchik makes an observation that Shema is a din da'oraisa, is a biblical law, so therefore one would try to fulfill it at least in thought, whereas the Birkas Kriya Shema is a din d'Rabbanan, as a rabbinic law. And also the Rabbanan would not want to uproot a din d'oraisa completely, but they would uproot a part of the gzeira, which is the Birkas Kriya Shema. So just a lot of interesting halachas surrounding this particular state of affairs. Now, what is the reason for shechvas zera and tumas nida? Why is the Torah telling us? Why is a person becoming impure from a normal bodily function? We understand zav and zava are unnatural. We'll call them spiritual diseases. But shechvas zera, seminal emission, and nida, menstruation, are normal, natural bodily functions. Why are they impure? The Torah, the Rabban explain that the very basic, the most we'll call it fundamental experience of tuma, of impurity, is avi avos hatoma, is dead, a dead person, a person who has lost all potential in life. That being the case, if we extend that logic and that thought process further, then a person who is any form of loss of life in potential is an expression of impurity. So, for instance, when a person has an expression of seminal emission, and that semen will not be able to, that zera will not be able to be mazriya, to bring about life in this world, there is a state of impurity, there's a vacuum created there. In a similar way with a woman, when a woman reaches a stage of the month of menstruation, that's a time where there's a loss of the potential of life, which is being expressed, and so therefore, yes, it is natural, but it is a void, which is also the natural outcome of that is a state of impurity. Why does it last longer? It's only for a man for 1 day, for a woman for 7 days. The reason is because, first of all, the man's emission is shorter, his excretion is only for a few instances, whereas when it comes to a woman, the bleeding can go on up till 7 days, as the Ramban explains. But also the egg ultimately is the bearer of the life, ultimately, when it comes to this, which is there's more life or more potential, which is lost, which only appears once a month, one egg, and therefore there's more of gravitas in that lost as well. The Chida and the Chizkuni points out this halacha, which is that there's no tumah by ziva, by non-Jews. These flows, there's no halacha of tumah and tara by non-Jews. And the Chida says because this level, these types of things are really as a function of our proximity and closeness to Hashem, and therefore it is as a function of our closeness and holiness that this impurity is upon us. So this is not simply about a biological function of the body, it's also about a spiritual, theological function of the body as well, and it's connected to the body, but it's also about our state, our kedusha as well. Now, what is the difference between a nida and a zava? So the Torah makes it pretty clear that a nida is a normal menstruation cycle, and there only needs to be 7 days wait. That means to say from the moment of the beginning of bleeding till the mikveh is 7 days. However, that's the biblical law. The Gemara does describe us that Benois Israel, this is already 2,000 years ago, the daughters of Israel universally accepted upon themselves to treat nida, regular menstruation, like ziva, which requires not just 7 days, but 7 clean days. That means after the stopping of the bleeding, 7 days without any bleeding. That's an adoption of the practice of ziva, of zava, not just the practice of nida. That's how it comes to be. And this was not a rabbinic inaction. This wasn't the system of the external rabbinic endorsement over here. This was the Benois Yisrael, the Gemara describes themselves, who universally accepted this upon themselves as well. It is worthwhile how does this process of mikveh work? It's a very worthwhile essay to read. It's a small book called A Hedge of Roses by Rabbi Norman Lamb, on the topic of these very important topics. And in it, he describes a very beautiful idea, and in which he says that there's a misconception about how mikveh works. Many people think of this as this archaic, superstitious experience, and it's all about cleanliness. Tumantara, about cleanliness. We need to clean the body because of all these things. That is not the case whatsoever. And he points out that if you notice on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, will go to the mikveh no less than five times and wash his hands 10 times. Clearly, in the words of Rabbi Norman Lamb. Thus, for instance, the high priest during the days of the temple had to undergo 5 immersions during the Yom Kippur services, certainly considering the form of worship which he conducted. One ought not to suspect the high priest of having soiled himself, that he required 5 baths for hygienic purposes. Quite evidently, the function of immersion is something other than hygienic. Indeed, the halacha requires the niddah to be thoroughly clean before immersion. And his point is that this is clearly a spiritual arrangement, not a physical arrangement. This is not about using the best form of Purell. This is about the spiritual rebirthing process, the reconnection to life and the source of life, Mayim Chayim, when it comes to the process of trying to heal from the mend of the void of life, whether it be through nida or shichva zera, or in a spiritual defect, which is ziva and zav, for a man or for a woman. With this, we conclude the 6th aliyah in Metzora. In the meantime, have a wonderful and meaningful day.